absolutely everything that we do. So, we got to really plan well.
Gosh, that's quite the pressure, isn't it? A small town of 900 balloons to 3,000.
Yes, quite comfortably. This Saturday, 25,000 people will embark on a trip to Martinborough for Martinborough Fair, and at least half, if not slightly more than half, will come back on the first Saturday of March, because that is how attractive Martinborough Fair is.
5 away from 5, the panel are international, says Karen. I lived in the Netherlands for 11 years, a country where there are more bikes than people. People do not need to shower after cycling to work. Just take your time, enjoy the ride. The problem with New Zealand cycle lanes is that they're not separated from the roads. Cycle lanes are like separate footpaths in the Netherlands. This was a wonderful story, and it really did the rounds virally. We all dream of finding out something we've stashed away in the cupboard for years is actually worth an insane amount of money, and that dream came true for one US veteran in Bonanzaville, West Fargo. The man, known as David, was floored when he found out on Antiques Roadshow that the Rolex he bought for $345 in 1974 was now worth up to $700,000. That watch was a Daytona Rolex popularised by actor Paul Newman when he starred in the 1969 film Winning. It was in perfect condition and made more rare by the oyster mark on the watch face. Here's a clip of Peter Plains from the Antiques Roadshow delivering the news.
A watch like this at auction is worth about $400,000. You okay? Let me don't fall. I'm not done yet. I said a watch like yours because of the condition of it. Basically, it's a new old stock watch. Your watch at auction today, $500,000 to $700,000. It's one of the rarest Paul Newman models, and in this condition, I don't think there's a better one in the world.
Is your Rolex up to that value, David?
Yeah, totally. Antiques Roadshow is one of the best things on earth. It is, to me, it's the absolute salve for all things negative, and I particularly love the British version because the people react no matter what. If it's worth more than they thought it was, or if it's worth less than they think it was, they all just go, well, of course I'm not going to sell it. And it is the happiest. I love it. Sorry to detract from the story of the man in the aptly titled Bonanzaville, but I love Antiques Roadshow.
I'm doing high fives. The night is good when the Antique Roadshow comes on, right, Nalini?
Absolutely. I totally agree with David. The British one is the best. I have a 1984 Seiko dual performance. You know when they release the digital and the analog?
You don't.
I wonder if that's worth $612,000.
That's a pretty cool watch.
In my dreams, Wallace.
Yeah. Do you wear it or do you keep it safe?
I keep it safe.
Nice.
I had a 1987 Honda Civic.
That's probably worth more.
Yeah.
Did you put it in the garage and put plastic over it and keep it safe, David?
No, I think I forgot to ever replace its oil and then it died.
Nalini Baruch, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Wallace.
Will you come again?
I will.
Thank you very much. And David Cormack, you too. It's been good having you both on.
Thank you, Wallace.
I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, Friday from 3:45. Checkpoint next. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, the mother of a young disabled boy badly injured in a kindergarten fall, says her son's had no justice, despite the kindy breaching health and safety rules. An Air New Zealand charter flight will evacuate New Zealanders stuck in Wuhan, ground zero for coronavirus. But what about those outside of the city? A region of 45,000 people in no state houses. We're in Wairarapa, where demand for accommodation is through the roof. The government's splashing the cash, buying up land around Northport before Cabinet's even decided to move Auckland's freight there. Horse before the cart? Kiwi doctors reveal we've been treating collapsed lungs all wrong. We've got the details of their game-changing research.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. New Zealanders stuck in the lockdown city of Wuhan have a renewed hope of escape, with the government announcing it will charter a plane to bring them home. Preparations are underway to send an Air New Zealand flight in and out of the Chinese city where the coronavirus originated. But the plan is reliant on sign-off from the Chinese government, something other countries like Australia and the United Kingdom have had difficulties with. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the departure date is still uncertain.
As you can imagine, the Chinese authorities have demands from a range of countries trying to assist their citizens to get out. There's only been a handful so far that have, so there is quite a bit to work through on that.
Jacinda Ardern, the plane will be able to carry about 300 passengers and will fly from Wuhan to New Zealand. More than 160 New Zealanders have registered as being in Wuhan. The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, says any seats left on the flight will be offered to Pacific Island and Australian citizens. Meanwhile, New Zealanders in Wuhan and the wider Hubei province, much of which is in lockdown, are asking about how they can actually get to the departure point for the evacuation. Auckland woman Victoria Chen is in Tianmen, 2 hours' drive from Wuhan.
You know, the cities in Hubei are quarantined, and we were not allowed to go outside to go to other cities to travel. They have the strict travel restrictions. We want to know how we can get to Wuhan. We need the New Zealand government negotiate with Chinese government how we can get there.
Victoria Chen in Tianmen in Hubei province. The Hepatitis Foundation has replaced the chair of its board after an investigation found extravagant spending, including lavish dinners at top restaurants. RNZ revealed in November the charity spent more than $128,000 on travel for the chair, Chris Cunningham, in just over 2 years. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
The new chair is the Auckland Public Health Service Medical Officer, William Ranger, who was appointed last week. The Hepatitis Foundation, which receives millions of dollars of taxpayers' money, didn't respond to questions about whether Chris Cunningham resigned or was asked to leave. Following the Charity Services investigation, the regulator sent the foundation a letter of expectation. The foundation has now brought in its own auditors. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
A woman who suffered a collapsed lung says she wishes she could have benefited from new research that says the best treatment is none at all. A joint New Zealand and Australian study has found doctors have been unnecessarily inserting chest drains for the collapsed lung treatments for decades. It found monitoring patients and giving them paracetamol was a far better approach. The study is expected to change practice around the world. Wellington woman Claire Honeywell had a tube inserted for her collapsed lung.
They put the drain in, which was pretty horrible. They'd given me some morphine and stuff, but I could still feel the tube inside. It was just a really horrible feeling.
Claire Honeywell from Wellington. Fire crews in Canterbury and central Otago spent the afternoon bringing scrub fires under control that threatened buildings and delayed traffic. Fire and Emergency says 10 crews and 2 helicopters fought to protect property as a scrub fire spread in the Gippsland Valley near Queenstown. In Canterbury, a scrub fire reduced State Highway 1 to 1 lane near Chertsey. Fire conditions are expected to worsen with fire bans in place in many South Island areas. In central Otago and the Queenstown Lakes Fire District, all activities that cause sparks are also banned. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 5. To sport now, the Black Caps coach Gary Stead doesn't believe his side is super over chokers, but concedes they need to get better when it comes to their sudden death performances. The Black Caps lost their third straight super over decider in the T20 match against India in Hamilton last night, the win giving the tourists an unassailable 3-0 lead in the 5-match series. Last year, New Zealand lost 2 super over playoffs against England, most memorably the one-day World Cup final and then again in a T20 game in Auckland in November. But Stead believes the side generally performs well in tight situations.
You win some, you lose some, but we've got to get better at winning them, and we have to make sure when we're put under pressure like that we have answers. And in the super overs, it hasn't been as good as what we've wanted it all the time, but then you only look back a little bit further back from that in the World Cup, we were outstanding in those clutch moments as well. So it's sort of not doom and gloom, but it is something we have to address and make sure that we get better with.
Meanwhile, the White Ferns were all out for 149 runs in the third one-day international against South Africa in Hamilton. Experienced batsman Susie Bates scored 51 runs. South Africa lead the three-match series 2-0. Damien McKenzie won't make his long-awaited return to the Chiefs Super Rugby opener against the Blues tomorrow night after all. Sidelined for 9 months after a knee injury, the All Blacks playmaker has pulled up at training with a thigh strain. Sean Stevenson replaces McKenzie in the Chiefs starting 15. And that's the news.
Splashing the cash.
This is the biggest investment in infrastructure in a generation, and these projects are all about future-proofing New Zealand's economy and rebuilding critical infrastructure like hospitals, schools, and building transport infrastructure.
Missing out.
You know, Auckland's 12 times bigger than us, and we accept it needs investment, but they got 696 times more investment than us.
But how long will it take?
These guys are great at announcing stuff, but the delivery has been very poor so far, and they won't deliver these in any timely fashion.
Driving the news agenda. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from MedService taking us through to midnight tomorrow, Friday. For Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula, mainly fine. Isolated light showers in Waikato spreading north this afternoon and evening, clearing up tomorrow. Bay of Plenty in Gisborne, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon. Waitomo to Kapiti Coast, including the Central High Country. Isolated light showers clearing from the south today. Fine spells increasing tomorrow. Hawke's Bay, Waitatapa and Wellington becoming fine this afternoon. Northwesterlies rise to gale tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, rain in Fiordland spreading north this evening. Clearing tomorrow, becoming fine. A period of severe northwesterly gales for Fiordland. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. Severe northwesterly gales for a time in exposed parts of Canterbury. Otago and Southland, mainly fine. Scattered rain tonight and in the morning. Severe northwesterly gales for a time as well. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers tomorrow morning, otherwise fine. Right on 6 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The mother of a young disabled boy badly injured in an accident at a South Auckland kindergarten says there's been no justice for her son, even after the kindy was found to have breached multiple health and safety rules. In October last year, 4-year-old Masua Tusa, who has cerebral palsy and uses a wheelchair, suffered extensive facial injuries after he fell downstairs at Manurewa West Kindergarten while he was supposed to be supervised. No one sought medical attention for him, and his mother, Millie, only discovered his injuries when she went to collect him as usual. Documents released to Checkpoint by the Ministry of Education show Manurewa West Kindergarten was placed on a provisional licence and required to meet certain conditions, including retraining staff. Its licence was only reinstated 2 days before Christmas. Millie Tusa says her smiley, happy boy, Masua, has changed since he took a tumble down the stairs at Manurewa West Kindergarten last October while strapped in his wheelchair. He hasn't returned to kindy since because he's anxious and fearful, and he's not at all keen to start school later this year. Millie's anxious too and struggling with feelings of guilt. Talking about what's happened to her son brings her to tears.
I try to make it sound like I'm happy he's going to primary. I'm like, so son, you're going to go primary this year? You're going to get big boy school? And he'll turn around and be like, no, mommy, no. I stay home with mommy. I was like, why? And he goes, I don't like school anymore. And he'll just sit there and goes, mommy, I'm scared.
How does that make you feel?
It breaks my heart knowing that I trusted that one incident changed my son's mindset for life. One accident that teachers think that was so minor has traumatized my son. The effect that it's had on me is that unless it's my family that's looking after my son, I don't trust anyone looking after my son. I get little panic attacks if I have to go somewhere.
It wasn't his first significant fall on the kindy's watch. It wasn't even his second. This was Masua's third tumble in 9 months while in the kindergarten's care. We'll come back to that. But when Masua nosedived down the stairs in his wheelchair in October, he landed on concrete, severely grazing his face. Large patches of skin were scraped from his nose, forehead and cheeks. Here's a reminder from the story we did at the time. In photos taken within 24 hours of his accident, the 4-year-old has severe facial injuries where the top layer of skin is gone. They're on part of his nose and upper lip. A large chunk of his left cheek is scraped raw and his left eye is swollen shut. The red, angry-looking grazes continue along his eyebrow and between his eyes. They're also on the left side of his forehead, right up to his hairline. They're weeping and they almost look like friction burns. Documents released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act show the kindergarten was in serious breach of health and safety regulations. The teacher who looked after Masua following his most recent fall did not seek further medical treatment or advice from head office, as required under the kindergarten's own health and safety policy. So instead of seeing a doctor, Masua, who had landed face down on concrete, sat without further medical attention from about 1:30 in the afternoon until 4 p.m. when his mother collected him as normal, oblivious to what had gone on.
I don't know how they become professionals if they don't know the stuff that they're supposed to know, especially when they told me that they were able to look after a kid that's down to a wheelchair.
It was Masua's mum, Millie, who took him straight to a doctor. Documents released to Checkpoint show that Masua had fallen from his wheelchair 2 other times, in February and June last year. The exact details have been redacted, but what is clear is that kindy staff failed to do the right thing on both those occasions too. They didn't follow health and safety policy. Here's what the Education Ministry memo says.
Policy and procedure requires staff to apply first aid, assess the child in situation, contact parent or emergency contact, and call head office for further advice and support. A list of considerations regarding the injury, illness or incident will be made, which will then lead to further action, including contacting an ambulance.
That didn't happen. Kindy staff were ignorant to the policies and didn't understand or carry out their full responsibilities. The ministry identified 10 serious breaches of health and safety protocol, including under the headings of medical assistance, training emergency plan, hazard checklist, and children washed when soiled.
I really just don't like that kindy. I can't say I hate it, but now I hate going past that kindergarten. I just don't like. I'm not saying that I hate the staff. I don't like how they handled my son's situation.
A medical opinion sought by the police found Masua's injuries were consistent with an accident, but they're still concerned about the similarity between Masua's June and October falls and the lack of medical assistance or follow-up by staff. Masua's mother, Millie, is adamant the kindy didn't contact her the day of the October accident. The exact details of what's noted as 4 attempts to contact her are blanked out. A summary, though, notes the information on Masua's contact form was not complete.
Even if they couldn't get a hold of me, as they said, they should have taken them to doctors. Not just sit there and then just expect things to just go away.
The Ministry of Education suspended Manurewa West Kindergarten's full licence just over a week after the October tumble, issuing it instead with a provisional licence. That required it to meet certain conditions, including professional development for staff and providing proof staff understood their responsibilities in case of an accident. The kindy's full licence was reinstated on December 23rd. The Ministry of Education declined to be interviewed, saying it has nothing to add. But Millie Tusa says she's still not sure of exactly how her son fell down the stairs and why the specialist carer that should have been caring for Masua one-on-one was not with him at the time.
They should only take in children they can handle. If they know they can't handle certain children, they should be honest.
The county's Manukau Kindergarten Association that manages the Manurewa West Kindergarten, along with 26 others, has ignored our requests for an interview. We wanted to ask exactly what changes they've made and whether staff at all their kindies are aware of their health and safety obligations. Do you feel you've got any justice out of this, Millie?
No.
Well, what would justice look like for your son? What would you choose?
To have their school closed down. That's all I want is, but then I feel selfish. I feel heartless for all the other children that actually go there and enjoy that kindy.
Ministry of Education documents say the Teachers' Council will conduct its own investigation, but the council's told Checkpoint it's still waiting on information from the ministry. Well, let us know what you think of the response from the Ministry of Education and what's gone on there. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And if you are listening on the radio or in your car, that item will go up online and you can see the pictures of Masua's injuries. Air New Zealand will be evacuating New Zealanders out of Wuhan, the epicentre of the deadly coronavirus, on a government-chartered flight. The government has been in talks with both Australia and the United States about evacuation plans, but New Zealand will go it alone, chartering a 300-seat aircraft. Since yesterday, the number of New Zealanders registered has more than tripled. However, getting the plane in and out of Wuhan is dependent on getting permission from the Chinese government. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Diplomatic staff are now getting in touch with the roughly 160 New Zealanders registered as being in Wuhan on the government's Safe Travel website to see whether they want to be on the flight. Other countries like Australia and the United Kingdom are still trying to get permission for their planes to fly in and out of Wuhan to evacuate their citizens. While the New Zealand government has confirmed it will charter a flight, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the details of the evacuation plan are still being worked through.
As you can imagine, the Chinese authorities have demands from a range of countries trying to assist their citizens to get out. There's only been a handful so far that have, so there is quite a bit to work through on that.
The Foreign Minister Winston Peters says, however, New Zealand consular staff on the ground will not be leaving.
No plans for that at this point in time. That's what they're there for. One of the risks of being in foreign affairs is that you're on the ground, you're the face of our country, and we don't cut and run the first time we see a problem.
He says quarantine arrangements for those returning to New Zealand are still being worked through.
We've got to ensure that we secure the safety of the New Zealand population and don't endanger our own population back home with the transport of these people being evacuated out of China.
Ms Ardern says the Health Ministry is looking at quarantine options.
The Ministry of Health has pandemic plans in place, as you'd expect. What they're doing is working through those, checking they're most appropriate for the circumstances we have. We will provide details of that before anyone returns to New Zealand.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says New Zealand had some experience with quarantining people during the swine flu outbreak, and the same approach can be taken with coronavirus.
The options range from asking people to isolate at home to potentially a hotel or other place like that to some other facility. We're looking at all those options and we'll be providing advice to the government.
The government is encouraging New Zealanders still trapped in Hubei province to register on Safe Travel and ensure all of their details are accurate and up to date to give the best indication of demand for the flight. Those who do take a seat on the plane will be required to pay a nominal fee. However, the government will absorb most of the cost of the charter flight. It says if there are any spare seats, those from the Pacific and Australia will be given priority. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
New Zealanders stuck in the wider Hubei province are appealing for more information on how they get to the city of Wuhan, the departure point for the planned evacuation. More than 160 people have registered on the Safe Travel website as being in the city, the epicentre of the deadly coronavirus outbreak. But there are other New Zealanders in Hubei province which is in lockdown. Chen Liu reports.
Auckland woman Anna Ann is in the city of Yichang in Hubei province, about 4 hours drive from Wuhan. She is visiting her parents with her husband and 2 young children. She says the government's announcement came as a relief.
I think that's very helpful and give us some hope and encourage. But we're not quite sure where we're going to send toll. And what we're going to do there, so we still have some concerns.
Ms. Ann says more details would be appreciated.
I want to know what kind of flights we're going to use, and in place we're going to send toll, and also the cost as well. And also if the government could think about the children, the particular little children.
Ms. An is also wondering how they get to their departure point in Wuhan, given that all cities in Hubei are in lockdown. Another Auckland woman, Victoria Chen, shares that concern. She is in Tianmen, 2 hours drive from Wuhan.
You know, the cities in Hubei are quarantined, and we were not allowed to go outside to go to other cities to travel. They have the strict travel restrictions. We want to know how we can get to Wuhan. We need the New Zealand government negotiate with Chinese government how we can get there.
Ms. Chen says she and her 1-year-old son need an assurance they will be safe from any potential infection during the evacuation.
I'm concerned about his health as well. If it's quarantined, I don't know where, and do they have enough kind of health support to help us?
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it isn't clear yet when the charter flight from Wuhan will take off.
As you can imagine, the Chinese authorities have demands from a range of countries trying to assist their citizens to get out. There's only been a handful so far that have, so there is quite a bit to work through on.
The Foreign Ministry says officials are developing procedures for pre-departure health screening, infection control in flight, and details for quarantine once they arrive in New Zealand. It says those who do take a seat on the plane will be required to pay a nominal fee. However, the government will absorb most of the cost. The death toll has risen to 170 and close to 8,000 people have been infected in China. Motahotaka o te ahiahi nei ko Chanliu tēnei.
Meanwhile, Australians are digesting the news that to get out of Wuhan, they may have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine on Christmas Island. The island is off the coast of Australia and houses a massive detention centre for refugees. It's been a major source of controversy for the Australian government. One Sydney mother who's in Wuhan says she was infuriated by the news initially, but is coming around to accepting it might be her best way out. The ABC's Barbara Miller reports.
Lily and her 2 young kids have been in lockdown at her mother's place in Wuhan for a week, but news that they could potentially be flown to Christmas Island for a 2-week quarantine initially didn't go down well.
Kind of infuriating, I guess. I just thought what kind of decision it is to evacuate us and put us on a distant island. We just want to go home. Like, we will be good citizens and we will stay home for the quarantine period.
Lily says after calming down, she's coming round to the idea that Christmas Island may be her best option.
If government will give me enough evidence that there is enough support, there is enough food, and my kids will be in good hands, for the safety of all the Australian people, that I'm not going to be a risk for them, I will do the right thing.
Asked why Australia was planning on transporting its evacuees to a remote island, the Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt gave this response.
What this does is it makes Australia one of the most forward-leading and one of the most cautious countries in the world. We make no apology for that. Our job is to save lives and protect lives.
It seems like an overabundance of caution.
That's Ian Mackay, a virologist from the University of Queensland.
Possible overreaction. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence to suggest isolating people without any signs of illness is going to really do anything except interrupt everybody's lives.
The government, though, says, well, we're looking at a case in Germany where it appears a woman without symptoms has infected a number of co-workers.
Yes, and that does cause concern if that's what actually happened. I guess what I would like to really know is, were they completely asymptomatic, or were they a little bit sniffly, a little bit coughy or sneezy? Because it's hard to understand how an asymptomatic person can actually shed virus.
From what you know of Christmas Island, do you think it's a good place to effectively run a quarantine station?
I don't personally know a lot about the structure of Christmas Island. I think it's important that if people are going to be kept there, they have to be kept separate, because if one of those people becomes sick and the others aren't, there is a risk that we'll develop an actual outbreak on the island. And if anybody were to be sick, they'd have to be given good medical care. So it's possible they would have to come back to a more advanced medical facility.
As the Christmas Island plan progresses, those whose lives and livelihoods have been put on hold in Wuhan are left trying to make the best of an unenviable situation.
All Australia is beautiful, so I have no doubt that the place is going to be beautiful, but it's still a very strange place for me.
And that's Sydney mother Lily ending that report by Barbara Miller. It's almost 5:25 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Don't forget, we always love hearing from you. You can get in touch by text, 2101 is the number. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz about anything you hear on the program this evening. The government is busy buying up land near Northport ahead of a cabinet decision on whether to move the bulk of Auckland's freight there. On top of yesterday's infrastructure announcements, the government is using more than $100 million of provincial growth funding to upgrade Northland's rail infrastructure. A large chunk of that will be spent on land between Marsden Point and Northport. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
A decision on Northport isn't due to be made until a report is sent back to Cabinet later this year. But that hasn't stopped the government from getting its ducks in a row. And at today's announcement in Northland, the Deputy Prime Minister once again made his position clear.
The inevitable is that the ports of Auckland have to be addressed and moved by 2035. Any smart business person or economy knows if that's the case, start now.
And it seems work is already underway after it was announced today that $40 million of the Provincial Growth Fund has been earmarked to purchase land along the designated spur line route to Northport and Marsden Point. Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones says having the land means that once a decision is made, the government will be ready to get going. But National Party Transport spokesperson Chris Bishop says they're going about it the wrong way.
The first thing to do should be decide, is the port going to move to Northport, Auckland Port going to move, and then you go about creating the infrastructure to make that happen. Instead, what New Zealand First has essentially forced on the government is spending $40 million to buy the land for a spur line to Northport in advance of a decision being made to actually move the port. So we could end up in a situation where the port doesn't move, and the government spent $40 million on a line that's essentially irrelevant and won't be used.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern disagrees, but won't say whether it signals a move to Northport.
Well, I think it's a strong signal that we are a common sense government, that it makes sense to connect your port to rail, regardless.
Far North Mayor John Carter says he and the other two Northland mayors are hoping it's a sign of good things to come.
We will be working with our people in Northland right across the region and people in Auckland as well, the public, to make sure that everyone understands what the benefits will be. But it's an indication of the fact that we now need to do our part so that then the parliamentarians, particularly during election year, can do their part and that they know that they'll get the support of the people if they come up with the goods.
Meanwhile, work continues using last year's $95 million of provincial growth funding to undertake maintenance of the rail line to Whangarei. Also announced today was $69 million to be spent on laying tracks through tunnels on the Northland line between Swanson and Whangarei, and reopening the rail line from Kauri and building a container terminal at Aotearoa. Kiwi Rail Group Chief Executive Greg Miller says that work is expected to be completed in September.
We're going to close the corridor for 5 months. There's 200 people to be employed across the corridor to do the maintenance and upgrade, and there'll be 15 work fronts working simultaneously. And when we get back operational, the freight trains run at night, and the rest of the corridor maintenance happens during the daylight hours.
He says it will mean the Northern Line that was mothballed a decade ago will be brought back to life. That's regardless of the future of Northport. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The pressure of the housing crisis is taking its toll on Masterton, where demand for an affordable place to live has gone through the roof. There are no state houses in Wairarapa, and the only community housing provider in the area has a wait list of more than 50. That provider is also having to raise rents to try and renovate its 500 homes, many of which are more than 70 years old. Logan Church reports.
I'm standing in the heart of Masterton's food bank. A converted hair salon now piled high with canned food, 2 minutes noodles and toilet paper. Packing frozen pizzas into a freezer is coordinator Lynn Tankersley. She says as demand for food grows, so does the need for housing.
The housing here is really, it's just terrible. There's just no accommodation for lower class people, I suppose. There's nowhere for them to go. There's nowhere.
Lynn and a group of volunteers have set up an emergency shelter down the road and are trying to find a house to provide emergency accommodation. But they are running into the same problem as everyone else. Nothing is in their price range, and when they do find something, it's snapped up by someone else.
Rental prices have just skyrocketed, especially over here. I guess it's the same throughout New Zealand, but some of our rentals are $500 a week. We've got solo mums paying $500 a week. That's just ridiculous. How can they afford food and all the other things that you need to afford?
Now, rising rents and house prices, of course, aren't just limited to Masterton. But City Councillor Sandy Ryan says this area has unique challenges.
We've got lack of social housing. We've got only one provider. We don't have the government's provider. We have waiting lists. We have no income-related rent scheme, which limits people's rent to 25% of their income. And we have no mechanism at the moment for addressing that.
There are almost no state-owned social houses in the Wairarapa. There used to be more than 500. But 20 years ago, the then national government sold them to Trust House, which is that one community housing provider Sandy mentioned. But
one of the other things that I really get upset about is while all this is going on, while our social housing provider know that our tenants are suffering financially because they're in a different situation than everybody else, they're not limited to their 25%, they're increasing rents. All the tenants have just been notified they're about to get another $20 a week increase effective March.
The chief executive of Trust House, Alan Pollard, says demand for those properties has gone through the roof.
Fundamentally, we've probably having playing catch up for a number of years, and probably a lack of reinvestment in the first 10 years that we had the houses. And it's just really, it's unfortunate that we do need to push the rents up. None of us want to push the rents up. But the fact of the matter is these houses are on average 70 years old. They're the very traditional state houses, if you like. And the fact is, we need to drive rent so that we can reinvest. And the intention is that, for all the increases that we do have to put onto our tenants, that money will be reinvested back into our houses because they need it.
And Alan Pollard says they have more than 50 applications on their desks from people desperate to get into these homes.
I've been chief executive here since 2013. When I took over then, the occupancy was round about 93% at the time throughout the whole portfolio. And now it is, 100%. It's about 99.8%.
The latest figures show that in the 3 months to September, there were $100,000 worth of emergency housing grants handed out in Masterton, up from $75,000 in June. And the number of households staying in transitional housing, including motels, jumped from 10 to 23 during that time. 18 months ago, the government promised to create 80 social housing places in the Wairarapa by 2022, but so far none have been built. And part of the concern is there is no kāinga order, formerly known as Housing New Zealand, presence in Wairarapa. And that's something Labour's List MP, Kieran McAnulty, says is being worked through.
Well, the need for public housing in Wairarapa is quite substantial, and I know that that's a trend across the country. But when you have a community housing provider that does its best, but doesn't have the resources to expand housing, it does fall on the government to do so. And this government is happy to do so. We announced 6,500 new places, of which, like I mentioned, Wairarapa gets 80. But when you have no Housing New Zealand or kāinga order presence here, it's always going to take longer and create more challenges than those regions that have a kāinga order presence.
Now, the Associate Housing Minister, Chris Farfoy, says he is seeking advice as to how to deal with public housing demand issues in the area. Meanwhile, Housing and Urban Development says it is working on proposals to bring new public housing to Masterton. And that brings us back to the food bank, where Lynn Tankersley is still stacking boxes of food that is still coming in and going out even faster.
There's not enough houses. We need to be building, hundreds of houses to get people accommodated, and that's just not happening.
In Masterton for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Coming up on on Checkpoint on RNZ National, emergency services want to expand the use of mobile phone tracking in crisis situations. New research from New Zealand doctors show the best treatment for a collapsed lung is actually no treatment at all. And it's back to school and time to pay for new uniforms and stationery. But what about school donations? We would love your feedback on the cost of getting your kids back to school. Now, just a reminder, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. It is time now for the headlines.
Thanks, Lisa. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the departure date of New Zealanders in Wuhan is still uncertain because of the number of other countries also trying to get their citizens out. The government has chartered a plane for New Zealanders stuck in the lockdown city, the epicentre of the coronavirus outbreak. Preparations are underway to send an Air New Zealand flight, but the plan needs sign-off from the Chinese government, something other countries like Australia and the United Kingdom have had difficulties with. Meanwhile, New Zealanders in the wider Hubei province, much of which is in lockdown, are asking how they can get to the departure point for the evacuation. Auckland woman Victoria Chen is in Tiananmen, 2 hours' drive from Wuhan, but she says they're not allowed to leave the area. The Hepatitis Foundation has replaced the chair of its board after an investigation found extravagant spending, including lavish dinners at top restaurants. RNZ revealed in November the charity spent more than $128,000 on travel for the chair, Chris Cunningham, in just over 2 years. The foundation didn't respond to questions about whether Mr Cunningham resigned or was asked to leave. A joint New Zealand and Australian study into the treatment of collapsed lung has found doctors have been unnecessarily inserting chest drains for decades. It found monitoring patients and giving them paracetamol was a far better approach. The study is expected to change practice around the world. The kindergarten, where a young Auckland boy suffered extensive facial injuries after he fell from his wheelchair, failed to report 2 other falls to his parents. 4-year-old Masua Tusa, who has cerebral palsy, landed face down on concrete when he fell downstairs in Manurewa West Kindergarten last October. No one sought medical attention for him. A Ministry of Education report released to Checkpoint identified 10 serious breaches of health and safety protocols, as well as 2 other falls in February and June. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time now for the business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, economy has boosted its first monthly trade surplus, that's a mouthful, in 6 months. So why the improvements? What's behind it?
Yeah, it's our exports, and primarily it's meat and dairy exports have really lifted our exports over the month of December. And so we ended up with a surplus of $550 million, which is the first surplus we've had in about 6 months. And that's pretty good because, it has been a difficult year, and with the trade worries and so on, it seems that New Zealand has a bit of resilience there with our food exports. So overall, our annual deficit, it dropped to an 18-month low to just $4.3 billion. All these numbers are pretty good, but it does also show that our exports to China have increased substantially. So it now accounts for 27.9% of all of our exports, and that compares with, say, the next nearest, which is Australia, at just over about 14.5%. So it goes to show you how big and important the Chinese market is. So with the coronavirus, there we go. What does that mean? Well, apparently it's not really going to affect our meat and dairy exports, our infant formula and those sorts of things, which the Chinese like to buy from us. But it has affected and will affect probably those luxury items, and that's our fresh seafood products. So in China, they like to have the New Zealand fish whole, and they like it fresh, as well as our crayfish. So those things are probably going to suffer somewhat because those types of events have been cancelled for the time being as that virus continues to claim lives and spread.
OK, let's move on to the country's capital markets, showing signs of a revival, although the stock exchange looks set to lose more companies. What's the reason for that?
Yeah, interestingly, so this Capital Markets Review looked at how many companies listed in the past decade, and of the 33, 1 in 5 of them were taken over. That's just in those are the more recent companies. Of course, we've seen a lot of other takeover action. Just this year, we've got, MetLife Care came out late last year. We've got Augusta Capital that came out yesterday. And so, yeah, there's a lot of takeover action. And you might think...
So 20% are being
21. Actually, a little bit more than 1 in 5, yeah. So you might think, well, why is that? And it's not because our companies are particularly cheap, you wouldn't think, because we've got a very strong market, right? But it could be that their asset values, that their net tangible value they're a little bit lower price than they could be. So there's a lot of value in New Zealand companies that's not expressed on the market. And those companies particularly are targets. And some companies list on the market so that they could have an exit strategy. So rather than just sell it to a private investor, they list it. That way they can sell some of their shares and then hopefully get a better price than they might have otherwise got just by looking for a private buyer, although there are plenty of those around as well, yes.
And any other excitement on the market today?
Not a lot. The U.S. Federal Reserve chair came out with a statement earlier and held U.S. interest rates, although signaled that he was a little unhappy with where their inflation rate is. And so it could be that we could see a markdown in the value of the U.S. dollar. And so the market reacted somewhat by ending their little rally that they saw in their market, and also marking down the currency about 10%, pricing that in. So a 10% chance of a rate cut from the U.S. Federal Reserve later this year. And in any case, our dollar was still a little change at 65.1 U.S. cents. It's just been sinking lower, and that's really because of our exposure and like everyone else's exposure to this great big risk out there. 96.7 Australian, so the Australian dollar is still a proxy for the yuan, and that's why the New Zealand dollar is gaining against the Australian, and the Australian's losing ground. And 50 pence, just under 50 pence, as a matter of fact.
Okay,
Lisa.
so it's just dropped below.
4,998.
Just gone below the midline.
It
there,
is,
Nona.
yeah. And the top 50 index is just slightly weaker, so I would say it's fairly steady and still quite toppy, right? Just down 11 points to 11,666.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with business there. New research from Kiwi doctors could save people all over the world from painful and unnecessary treatment for collapsed lungs. The standard treatment for the condition has been to insert a plastic tube to drain air that's leaked from the lung into the chest. But the joint New Zealand and Australian study published in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine has found it's better to do nothing at all. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
About 600 New Zealanders are hospitalised each year for collapsed lungs, and Wellington woman Claire Honeywell is one of them. She found herself in the emergency department after becoming unusually out of breath.
They put the drain in, which was pretty horrible. They'd given me some morphine and stuff, but I could still feel the tube inside. It was just a really horrible feeling.
That intervention, a tube to drain the air, has been standard practice for more than 50 years. But it turns out we've probably been doing it all wrong. A team from Wellington's Medical Research Institute of New Zealand has found patients who are simply observed and given paracetamol have fewer complications and spend much less time in hospital. The study co-author, Wellington respiratory doctor Kyle Perrin, says they started by looking at studies going back to the beginning of last century. They found none that said a chest drain was the best treatment.
But for some reason, from about 1960 on, doctors just started intervening with tubes because it seemed like the right thing to do. It became established practice.
Dr Perrin and his team followed more than 300 patients from Australia and New Zealand. Half of them had tubes inserted, but the other half were given mild painkillers and monitored. They found on average the tube patients spent 6 days in hospital, while the observed patients spent just 1.5 days, and there were far fewer complications for the non-tube group.
The patients were able to go home and get on with their lives immediately rather than stick around in hospital. But also the obvious other outcome is the significant cost savings to the health system.
Claire Honeywell was part of that research and had secretly hoped she'd be in the non-intervention group. No such luck, but she's glad other patients and the health system will benefit.
Yeah, how much does a bed cost for a day? I was in there for 4 days, but I felt completely fine. Apart from the fact I had this drain in me, and so if I could have avoided that, would have been brilliant.
And Dr Perrin says the findings are a game changer.
This is the commonest approach to treating this condition worldwide, is to place a tube. And so one of the reasons it's been published in such a significant journal is that it's going to have a global impact on the way that this disease is managed.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Emergency services want to expand their ability to locate at-risk people, such as missing trampers or kidnap victims, by tracking their cell phones. Currently, people can only be searched for using GPS if they make a 111 call. But the changes would allow anyone in harm's way to be tracked. Privacy Commissioner John Edwards, who is proposing the change, told our reporter Mackenzie Smith he supports it as long as it's regulated because there is the potential for misuse.
So at the moment, when calls are made to the 111 system, location tracking is enabled in case the call drops out, so the emergency services can get to the person who's needing assistance. The system has the capability of tracking any phone. So what they've asked for is an extension of the authority under the Telecommunications Information Privacy Code to allow for tracking of people where necessary to avoid a serious and imminent threat to them, to their life or health, whether they've called 111 or not. So this could be for people missing, people with dementia who have gone wandering and have a device with them, that sort of thing.
Are you concerned this could be misused?
Well, there is potential for misuse, so we are putting very strict rules around it. It can only be used in accordance with the authority under the code. Strict records have to be kept. There's a limit on how they can use that information and retain it, and we'll be keeping an eye on it and receiving the records of the circumstances in which the tracking is initiated at periodic intervals.
And are you confident emergency services are going to comply with all of this?
Yes, we are. They are obliged to comply with the law. This is a law which is going to empower them to use it for particular purposes, but not for others. So any abuse would be unlawful.
Do you think this change is going to worry New Zealanders?
Well, I would hope not, but if there are ways that, if there are worries, I would hope that people will submit and tell us what those are and tell us how we can strengthen the oversight to ensure that we help emergency services reach people who are in danger, but do not unnecessarily intrude on people's right to go about their business without being tracked.
Previously, were there privacy concerns?
Well, we only passed the amendment to the code to allow for the tracking of all emergency calls in 2017. So I think the technology developed to a point where that was practical, but they needed a legal authority. They have seen circumstances where it would have been helpful to get to someone or to locate a missing tramper or such like, and that person has not made a call to the 111 system, but so they've identified the potential to use the system also to reach people who are in harm's way.
Privacy Commissioner John Edwards talking to our reporter Mackenzie Smith. A public consultation runs until the end of February. It is about 13 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about that. Are you comfortable with increased ability to track people using their cell phones? Remember, it is only going to be in crisis-type situations. But keen to hear thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. After 4 years of division and debate, the path is now clear for the UK to leave the European Union. The European Parliament has ratified the Brexit withdrawal agreement with an overwhelming majority. But as the BBC's Katja Adler reports, the long and drawn-out process ended with more resignation than relief.
It's been an emotional day in Brussels. Most of these MEPs deeply regret Brexit. They felt honour bound today to approve the negotiated Brexit deal. But they meant what they then sang. After more than 40 years of EU membership, old acquaintances, the UK in this case,
will not be forgotten.
To come to results,
the new European Commission President declared everlasting love for the UK today, using the words of British novelist and poet George Eliot.
Only in the agony of parting do we look into the depth of love. We will always love you and we will never be far. Long live Europe.
That's it, it's all over. Finished.
And the UK's best-known European parliamentarian ensured he would not be forgotten. He told the EU it was doomed. And then...
I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye, and we'll look forward in the future to working with you as sovereign...
Mid-sentence, he had his mic cut. No national flag waving allowed here.
Could we please remove the flags?
There's something slightly surreal about this day, this week of goodbyes here in Brussels. And that's because the day after Brexit Day, we enter the transition period. So yes, legally we've left the European Union, but while we're sorting out a new trade deal, practically things stay the same. Paying into the EU budget, accepting laws made here inside the European Parliament, but we will no longer have a seat here at the decision-making table.
That is a lot of voices to lose.
For some UK MEPs today, even emptying their postbox at the European Parliament was a symbolic event.
It is a disaster. It's a huge disaster. Europe is not going to go away. We are going to have to trade with them. We will come on holiday and we will move around. We want to drive around. The regulations will be made here in this House, but there will be no British voice standing up for the UK when those regulations are made.
Tonight, Scottish National MEPs bid a tuneful, tearful farewell to the European Parliament. The Union flag flies here till Friday, but with trade talks just ahead, the EU-UK conversation is far from over.
Katja Adler reporting. To Washington DC now, where sparks have again been flying over John Bolton and his yet-to-be-published book. In it, the former National Security Advisor reportedly claims the president ordered for aid to be withheld from Ukraine until it announced an inquiry into his political rival, Joe Biden. The White House is now trying to block the book being published, saying it contains classified material. It says the book shouldn't be allowed to see the light of day until it's removed. All that's going on while the debate over having Mr. Bolton called as a witness continues. This is Democrat impeachment manager Adam Schiff.
There's no way to have a fair trial without witnesses. And when you have a witness who is as plainly relevant as John Bolton, who goes to the heart of the most serious and egregious of the president's misconduct, who has volunteered to come and testify, to turn him away, to look the other way, I think is deeply at odds with being an impartial juror.
Adam Schiff, the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, says if witnesses are called, it has to be done fairly.
If we get down the road on the witness issues, let's be clear. It should not be. I certainly can't dictate to this body. It should certainly not be, though, that the House managers get John Bolton and the president's lawyers get no witnesses. We would expect if they're going to get witnesses, we will get witnesses, and those witnesses would then, but all of that, just to be clear, changes the nature and scope of the proceedings. They didn't ask for it before.
Jay Sekulow, while the argument back and forth continues over whether witnesses will be called, the impeachment trial itself entered a new phase today. Senators were given the opportunity to ask questions of the House impeachment managers and the president's lawyers. CNN's Karen Kafer reports.
All 100 senators have an opportunity to ask questions today, but it is a handful of Republicans in particular that are getting a lot of attention. Senators like Mitt Romney of Utah, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine. They are being eyed as potential votes that could make the difference between calling witnesses or this trial wrapping up relatively quickly.
A more visible Chief Justice.
The Senate will convene as
John Roberts, now the voice of senators, as he reads their questions over a 16-hour period.
This is a question for the counsel for the president. Senator Feinstein asks the House managers. The senators ask.
House managers and the president's defense lawyers answering those questions and trying to push their cases.
The defense saying there's no wrongdoing on behalf of the president and that the House managers have a weak case.
There isn't any legitimate public interest, and they've totally failed to make that case.
The Democrats doing all they can to convince at least 4 Republican senators to vote yes on witnesses, such as John Bolton, the former national security advisor.
To turn him away, to look the other way, I think is deeply at odds with being an impartial juror.
Each answer allowed approximately 5 minutes.
To the President's counsel.
And the questions coming from one or multiple senators.
On my behalf, and also joined by Senators Loeffler, Lee, Kramer, and McSally.
But after the 2-day round of questions is finished, the senators and perhaps Roberts will finally have to confront a likely difficult vote on whether to call witnesses. And the timeline that's expected here is questions today and through tomorrow, setting up that debate over the witnesses on Friday. And you can see from the questions the senators have been asking just how they plan to use this question time. Democrats asking a lot of questions that prompt answers that point to the importance of witnesses, while Republicans asking a lot of questions that elicit answers that indicate they want to see this trial wrap up relatively quickly.
Karen Kafer reporting. Scientists in Britain say lungs have the surprising capacity to repair the genetic damage caused by smoking, but only if people quit. Even those who smoked a pack a day for 40 years before they stopped saw an improvement. The findings have been published in the journal Nature. The BBC's James Gallagher reports.
The thousands of chemicals in tobacco smoke corrupt and mutate the DNA in your lungs. They transform them from healthy to cancerous, and it was long thought that this genetic damage was permanent. But now a study by University College London and the Sanger Institute shows the lungs can recover. They performed a detailed genetic analysis of lung tissue from people who did not have cancer. In smokers, the overwhelming majority of cells had been mutated by tobacco smoke. Those cells had been altered up to 10,000 times. But a small proportion of cells seem to exist in what the researchers described as a nuclear bunker and escape the genetic devastation caused by smoking. When you quit, it's these cells that spread and heal the lungs. In people who quit, up to 40% of cells look just like those from people who never smoked. It was a massive surprise. This doesn't mean quitting eliminates all the risk of lung cancer, but Cancer Research UK said it was a double win for patients. Their lungs repair past damage, and by no longer smoking, they avoid further mutations.
And that's James Gallagher reporting. Don't throw away your old T-shirts, socks and jeans. They can be recycled into new, fashionable and comfortable clothing, according to a new company in the US. Adam Reed reports.
The next time you're thinking of freshening up your wardrobe, don't just throw away your old T-shirts, sweaters and jeans. A company in the US says it's found ways to recycle it by literally melting your clothes and making new ones from them. Evernew works out of a lab near New York City and has developed a new fibre they call NewCycle that looks and feels like cotton, but they say is 3 times stronger and made entirely from recycled clothing.
So we can essentially take our old clothes, liquefy them, turn them into our new clothes.
That's CEO Stacey Flynn.
If we prevent textiles from entering landfills, that is by far our biggest environmental reduction, because that methane that happens in a landfill cannot occur.
Flynn says the fibre has already caught the attention of fashion designer Stella McCartney, as well as global brands Adidas and Levi's. They expect NewCycle to pop up in some stores within the year.
And you can see the texture. This is still like T-shirts or shirts. You can see the woven structure.
According to the US Environmental Protection Agency, in 2017, nearly 17,000 tonnes of textiles were generated, and of that, nearly 2/3 of the used materials were sent to landfill. Any item made with the NewCycle fibre can go on, they say, to be liquefied again to make something else new too.
And that was Adam Reed reporting. Time for some of your feedback now on our earlier story about the 4-year-old boy who was injured when he fell down the stairs in his wheelchair at a Manurewa kindergarten. Richard's got in contact to say that, well, he thinks the kindy should be shut down and says that the mother, Millie, and her son really need more support from the authorities instead of people passing the buck. And Cole has got in contact to say there needs to be some compensation for that child for his injuries. And a lot of you are getting in touch about the cost of getting your kids back to school. This person says, with regard to expenses at the start of the school year, you might want to consider if the child is also doing extracurricular activities, e.g. dance, sports, swim lessons, music, etc., and all of those costs. Another text says, I just had to buy my daughter a new scientific calculator for maths. She is in year 12. It cost $105 on sale. Full price, $160. I don't even know if I could work out how to work one of those. Selwyn College Year 10 student, this person says, $650, $475 school donation, online learning and stationery. This does not include any sports activities and related costs, nor shoes. Last year, with uniforms, shoes and a new laptop also to be purchased, we were at about $2,500. We are finding it quite expensive on pretty good double incomes, so I have no idea how families on lower incomes manage, particularly if they have more than one child. This is not free education, says Maureen. Someone says, my grandchildren attend Bethlehem Primary School and their parents have had to pay $100 for each child plus $60 for each child's stationery, which they do not actually get to see. No cheap stationery from the warehouse. They also have a very strict uniform policy. Outlay $490. More on that after the news.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, good evening. The mother of a 4-year-old Auckland boy who suffered extensive facial injuries after he fell from his wheelchair says he remains traumatised. Masua Tusa, who has cerebral palsy, fell downstairs and landed face down on concrete at Manurewa West Kindergarten last October. A Ministry of Education report into the incident released a checkpoint identified 10 serious breaches of health and safety protocol and revealed the boy also had falls in February and June. Millie Tusa says there's been no justice for her son.
It breaks my heart knowing that I trusted, that one incident changed my son's mindset for life. One accident has traumatized my son. And the same smile I left him at Kindy was the same smile I see when I pick him up. And you don't see that anymore.
The ministry temporarily suspended Manurewa West Kindergarten's licence, but it has since been reinstated. An Auckland woman who is stuck in the deadly coronavirus zone in China says more information is needed for the proposed evacuation plan. The government has arranged with Air New Zealand to charter a plane to help New Zealanders leaving Wuhan. Anna Ann is in the city of Yichang in Hubei province, about 4 hours' drive from Wuhan, but the whole province is in a lockdown and she doesn't know how to get to the departure point. However, she's pleased to hear about the possible evacuation.
I think that's very helpful and it gives us some hope and encourage. But we're not quite sure where we're going to send to. And what we're going to do there, so we still have some concerns.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it's unclear when the charter flight will take off. Northland's mayors hope today's rail investment announcement is a sign of Auckland's freight moving to Northport. Out of the $109 million of provincial growth funding announced to upgrade Northland's rail, $40 million will be put aside to purchase land along the designated spur line route to Northport and Marsden Point. A report on Northport is due before Cabinet later this year. The Mayor of the Far North District, John Carter, says it's a significant step.
It's an indication of the fact that we now need to do our part so that then the parliamentarians, particularly during election year, can do their part and that they know that they'll get the support of the people if they come up with the goods.
John Carter says moving the port will not only benefit Northland but the whole of New Zealand. The Advertising Standards Authority has ruled a National Party advertisement is mischievous but not misleading. It received 4 complaints about the social media advertisement comparing fuel prices under National and Labour and the amount of tax per litre. The advertisement includes a bar graph which is not to scale and gives the impression the difference is much larger. The majority of the complaints board found the data displayed was correct and sourced, and this saved the hyperbolic graphic from being misleading. A lack of social housing in Masterton is putting pressure on local charities. There are no state houses in the area, and the one community housing provider has a waiting list of more than 50. 80 new social housing places have been promised by the government by 2022, but none of those have yet been built. The local food bank coordinator, Lynn Tankersley, says more and more families are struggling to pay market rents in Masterton, and if they can't afford it, there is nowhere for them to go.
Rental prices have just skyrocketed, especially over here. I guess it's the same throughout New Zealand, but, some of our rentals are $500 a week. We've got solid mums paying $500 a week. That's just ridiculous. How can they afford food and all the other things that you need to afford?
Tankersley, the food bank coordinator in Masterton. A Christchurch solo mother says the government's no donations policy will be a massive help to her family. The government is putting $63 million into more than 1,500 decile 1 to 7 schools, which can find it difficult to raise funds from their communities. Some families are expected to save at least $100 per child this year due to the policy. Christchurch mother Dana Clark says it will make a major difference, and that money could go towards her children signing up to extra curriculum activities. It's 3.5 minutes past 6. On to sport now. The White Ferns batting order has collapsed in the third one-day international against South Africa in Hamilton. The home side were all out for 149 runs in the 39th over, with Susie Bates' half-century the only score to note. In reply, a short time ago, South Africa were 45 for 1 after 10 overs. Two-time Olympic medalist Nick Willis says the decision to postpone the World Indoor Athletic Champs in China in March is the right one, but it could hamper the build-up to the Tokyo Olympics for many athletes. Willis was one of 5 New Zealand athletes due to compete at the event, but says it wasn't a key part of his build-up to the Olympics in July. Over the next 6 weeks, Willis is competing in 6 events. The Hurricanes have given Fletcher Smith the first chance to stake his claim for the number 10 jersey left vacant by All Blacks first 5 Beauden Barrett. Barrett signed a 4-year deal with the Blues in July. Smith pipped Jackson Garden Bishop for the starting spot, but will have plenty of experience around him, with All Blacks TJ Perenara and Geordie Barrett named to start at halfback and fullback. The Canadian striker Christine Sinclair has become the all-time top scorer in international football, breaking the mark held by American Abby Wambach when she netted her 185th goal against St Kitts and Nevis. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, overseas correspondent Peggy Ravel is on the line from Canada, where they are debating what to do with Harry and Meghan now they're retiring from public life. Sharam Ariam makes his debut as our latest cultural ambassador, introducing us to the world of Iranian classical music, while our changing world asks whether the fires in Australia are a sign of things to come in New Zealand. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now through to midnight tomorrow, Friday, from Met Service, Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Mainly fine. Isolated light showers in Waikato spreading north this afternoon and evening, clearing tomorrow. Bay of Plenty in Gisborne, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon. Waitomo to the Kapiti Coast, including the central high country. Isolated light showers clearing from the south today. Fine spells increasing tomorrow. Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington becoming fine about now. Northwesterlies, though, rise to gale tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain in Fiordland spreading north this evening, clearing tomorrow, becoming fine. A period of severe northwesterly gales for Fiordland. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. Severe northwesterly gales for a time in exposed parts of Canterbury. Otago and Southland mainly fine. Scattered rain tonight and tomorrow morning. Severe northwesterly gales for a time. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers tomorrow morning. Otherwise, fine weather. Just after 6 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. And you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. The World Health Organization says China needs the world's solidarity and support to overcome the coronavirus outbreak. The death toll from the illness has risen again to 170. Countries have started flying their citizens out of Wuhan, where the coronavirus originated, and putting them in quarantine. The WHO is set to meet again to decide whether the situation constitutes a global public health emergency. Cases of the coronavirus have now been reported in at least 16 other countries. The BBC's John Sudworth reports.
Safely out of Wuhan, a plane arriving at a California airbase with 200 Americans on board. Earlier, Japan got a flight full of its citizens out, touching down in Tokyo.
The night before the Great Escape.
But the Brits are still only preparing to leave. Khan Lambert's grandmother, Vera, stuck here on holiday, is running low on her medications.
How do you feel about going home?
Delightful. There's frustration with the UK government.
I think it's been an absolute shambles, to be honest with you. I don't think the government have really known what they've been doing. I don't think they've had as much contact with the Chinese authorities as they say, because if they had, I would assume that they had been getting the same information that the Americans had got, that the Japanese had got, and they'd have been able to put plans in place sooner.
Despite the lockdown, Infections in Wuhan are still rising rapidly, and anyone flown home from here faces 2 weeks in UK quarantine. Much is still not known about the virus, but across China, few are taking any chances. Villagers are putting up roadblocks and shutting out the world with great barriers of earth. No outsiders are allowed in at all, this man tells me. Beyond the human cost for China, there's another impact to all of this: fear, with countries beginning to advise against travel, with airlines cancelling flights, and with whole villages cutting themselves off from the outside world. The economic cost is likely to be severe.
My name is Nick.
For some UK nationals, escape is not an option. Nick House is British, but his wife's from Indonesia. She's been told she can't get a place on the plane.
My mum and dad are worried, my sister's worried. They just want us home, really.
They face more long weeks of uncertainty in a ghost city.
John Sudworth reporting. Two-time Olympic medalist Nick Willis says the decision to postpone the World Indoor Athletic Champs in China because of the coronavirus is the right one, but will hamper the build-up to the Tokyo Olympics for many athletes. Willis, along with 4 other New Zealand athletes, Tom Walsh, Jacko Gill, Dame Valerie Adams and Madison Lee Vesha, were due to compete at the event in March. He has a program of 6 races over the next 7 weeks, including several in New Zealand, and told sports editor Stephen Hewson his plan was to tag world champs onto the end of that.
Seems to be the right move to at least not have it there at this time, but yeah, I was sort of surprised that it wasn't being moved to a different location. That was sort of the rumours going around the track circuit when I was in Boston last weekend, that perhaps it might be in Poland, and now I've read some articles that some cities had volunteered to be hosts of it. So for them to decline that and choose to do it the following year, that's definitely an interesting decision from them.
A big impact on your build-up for Tokyo too, presumably.
For me, not so much. I was more using the World Indoors as a backup option if I felt I needed some extra racing. But the way that I'm preparing for the Olympics is firstly trying to qualify it by doing 6 races in 7 weeks, so it would have extended up to a pretty long season anyway. So not so much for me, but it's just how it might impact other people who might have really sort of pegged that as their number one focus for the year other than the Olympics yet. So that might be a lot tougher for them.
How does that fit on the calendar for most people? Will most people have taken the approach to you? I mean, obviously Tokyo looms as the big event for the year, but as a middle distance runner, would most be looking to have used that simply as an add-on, or would many have actually keyed that in as a key part of their build-up?
Everyone takes a slightly different approach. I had used the World Indoors as key preparations for both my successful campaigns in Beijing and Rio, and I'm sure others would have as well. I know most of the New Zealanders were planning to go, Tom Walsh and some others. It's a good opportunity to get out of your small pond and go challenge against the best people in the world and get some prize money, and sort of not only have the Olympics as your long-term focus, have another sort of stepping stone along the way to distract you. But yeah, so I'm sure there's going to be different emotions from different athletes around the world, but it must have been tough for those who had been focusing their training specifically for this, then for it to not be taking place at all with only 2 months in advance notice. Yeah, that's going to be a little bit more difficult.
Does it then help you, do you think, possibly in your build-up, if you hadn't used or weren't going to use this as a key part of it, and others may have been, does that maybe just add a little bit of advantage to you come Tokyo?
Perhaps. It's really hard to know. You don't necessarily want other people to have to face a difficulty in order for you to succeed. You know, you really just focus on what can help with you. So I'm thankful that it wasn't my primary focus, that it's not going to suddenly get me all stressed out and try and figure out B and C options. That really was sort of... I probably still would have gone, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all of my season, so it doesn't really change anything that I'm doing in the way that I'm approaching anyway.
Nick Willis talking to sports editor Stephen Hewson. It's back to school time and many families are breathing a sigh of relief that this year they won't be asked to cover expensive school donation costs. The no donations policy was brought in by Education Minister Hipkins last year and means the government will pay $150 per student to low decile schools in lieu of a donation. The scheme will cost $63 million and is a boost to the budget of many schools. Our reporter Alicia Foon has more.
The financial pressures of a new school year can be a huge burden for parents. Christchurch solo mum Dana Clark knows all too well what that's like.
I've got 4 at primary school level and I've got 3 at high school level. There's stationery and uniforms and things like that. Hard to maintain, especially uniforms, the expensive uniforms. The opt-in scheme definitely help a lot at this time of year. Just being able to go out and get the stuff rather than having to save up for it.
The average school donation in New Zealand is $147.75. Covering that cost is massive for many families, and the no donation scheme aims to help with the back-to-school struggle. The government money will go to more than 1,500 decile 1 to 7 schools, which can find it difficult to raise funds from their communities. New Zealand Principal Federation National President and Hastings School Principal Perry Rush says it'll make a difference, but he was gutted higher decile schools missed out.
We're taking about an additional $60,000 worth of income. We are expecting to be able to pass on about $100 per family in terms of savings. However, that's variable for varying schools depending on the programs that they offer.
So, what could saving $100 per child mean for someone like solo mother Miss Clark?
Absolutely huge, absolutely. That could even go towards an extracurricular activity each, you know. I've looked at one that's $30 a term. I mean, that nearly covers the whole year. It just means more opportunity for them.
Many parents will still have to pay for their children's stationery and uniforms, but some schools are going above and beyond for some of the estimated 250,000 Kiwi kids living in poverty. Palmerston North's Ross Intermediate School Principal Wayne Jenkins says they've provided stationery to its students for free and removed costs for sports.
We've, for the last 5 years, made the conscious decision to not charge our students and ultimately our community for sports activities, stationery and costs related to delivering the curriculum, to basically ensure that any student that wants to participate in additional activities and extracurricular activities can do so without feeling a burden on their family.
He says although it may be unattainable for some schools, he believes investing in a child's life and relieving the pressures of back-to-school stress must be prioritised. For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Foon tēnei.
It's almost 17 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and a few of you have been getting in touch about the cost of getting your children back to school. This person says, I paid roughly a $550 school donation and stationery, including swimming lessons, for my 5-year-old at a Decile 10 Central Auckland Primary School. I'm happy to pay if it results in better resources for my child's learning. What annoys me, this person says, is the anecdotal evidence I have of the very low percentage of parents who don't pay the donation but are more than able to. Another person's got in contact to say back to school costs are nothing compared to university. They say my daughter starts at Victoria next month. Halls of residence fees alone will be about $16,500. Let me know what that includes. Is that 3 meals a day plus a roof over your head? I'm really curious. 2101 on the text. The Australian state of New South Wales has announced an independent inquiry into its ongoing bushfires, promising to leave no stone unturned. Premier Gladys Berejiklian has said this morning that it was crucial to examine all aspects of the deadly crisis, including the impacts of climate change. The ABC's Madeline Jenner reports.
The bushfire season in New South Wales is far from over, and already Premier Gladys Berejiklian says the crisis is expected to cost the state more than $100 million.
There is no doubt that given the fact that we have lost 10,000 dwellings, which have either been lost or impacted in a major way in New South Wales, that's including residential and business dwellings and farms, we know the clean-up task is huge.
But it's a cost that will be shared with the federal government. New South Wales is also set to scrutinise the causes causes and its response to the bushfires in a new inquiry. Former New South Wales Police Deputy Commissioner Dave Owens and former New South Wales Chief Scientist Mary O'Kane will head the 6-month inquiry, which is expected to start within days. But there won't be public hearings. Gladys Berejiklian says that decision was made to get the job done as quickly as possible.
We want the process to be robust and comprehensive, but we also want it to be meaningful so that government can adopt any recommendations ahead of the next bushfire season.
The inquiry is expected to focus on fuel loads, drought, hazard reduction and the role of climate change. But some say it's too soon. Andrew Constance is the New South Wales Transport Minister and member for Bega, an area badly affected by the fires.
I'm glad there is going to be a state-held commission of inquiry which will look at the operational challenges that beset the Rural Fire Service. I'm glad we're going to look at the factors which have driven it. But I just say to everyone, I mean, last Thursday we lost another 20 plus homes here and a life. And we've still got active fire. I saw some last night. So we're not ready for the big P politics here. We're just not.
Labor MP Mike Kelly is the federal member for Eden Monaro. He welcomes an inquiry but also wants the federal government to act.
I'm pleased to see that the issue of climate change and what it's presenting us in terms of the challenges for the future, and so I'm glad that that's being included. But really, this is something that requires a national focus. It's the federal government needs to do a thoroughgoing strategic review that looks at all the facts and the projections to know where we are going from here, to understand what the deficiencies in personnel and capability were for tackling this crisis and take the action that's required.
But the federal government would say that most of the ways we fight fires in this country are state-based. We operate state-based services.
Well, look, the overarching policy, if we look at it from that point of view, is really a federal issue on how we deal with climate change. We certainly have to have the Commonwealth and the states working hand in glove on all of these matters. The fire that straddled the Victoria-New South Wales border just brought home a lot of those issues, as simple and as basic as things like the fact that the CFA and the RFS don't have compatible communications, for just one example.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he will take a proposal to establish a royal commission into the bushfire disaster to Cabinet when Parliament resumes. The South Australian and Victorian governments have also announced their own inquiries.
A major rubbish dump in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, has become a hotbed of criminal activity. Organised gangs take control of the city's waste disposal industry, and a number of people are being injured or even killed as they try to find things in the dump they can sell. Deutsche Welle's Melanie Kuradabel reports.
Every morning, thousands of scavengers in Nairobi, Kenya, stream to the Dandora dump site. While the global trash business has become a multi-million-dollar venture, the people here try to earn a few dollars a day picking and selling waste to make ends meet. It's a dangerous place where gangs and cartels rule with violence. It's every man or boy for themselves, says 12-year-old Richie Spice Omondi. He is scared of the older boys and men who try to steal the waste others have collected.
I've seen many people being killed.
Just yesterday, Richie himself was attacked. A traumatizing experience.
I told him, "This sack is mine." He locked me up inside a truck. It was about 7 in the morning. He may have been sent by the devil. He beat me up until 10 o'clock that evening.
It may be government-owned and looks like a mess, but this place is highly organized, with every inch tightly controlled by gangs.
You should never pick from someone's truck. You aren't supposed to. You must wait for them to finish taking everything they want. Otherwise, it's just outright war.
Not only was Dandora dump site officially declared full and was supposed to close down years ago, but it's also become a magnet for violence and lawlessness. So why has Nairobi's trash gold mine been allowed to continue existing for so long? One of the so-called dump site lords, who was part of a lethal takeover in which at least 14 people died, agrees to speak to us, but on the condition of anonymity. He says it's the prospect of money that has kept the site running, but that it's not the gangs who make the serious money. Rather, it's those who they answer to, the garbage cartels.
There are the cartels, or those powerful people.
If you openly speak about the dealings they're involved in, you're in danger. They all hide how they make their money, but they own the tenders. For anyone in Kenya to get anything, you have to pay.
Nairobi's Governor Mike Sonko and other senior county officials have been accused of irregular payments for garbage collection services amounting to $3.5 million and having received bribes. The county department in charge of awarding the garbage contracts declined to talk to us for this report. Deep in the dump site, Richie's sack is finally full. Time to go weighing the pickings of the day. But there is no alternative for Richie and his mother to make a living. He hasn't given up hope just yet.
I only want to be a pilot. Nothing but a pilot. That's what I want to be.
The wheels of justice are slow in Kenya. There is no saying how long it will take for corruption in the tendering system to end, for the gangs to stop intimidating Nairobi's poorest, and for conditions at the dump site to improve.
And that was Melanie Kuradabel reporting. Commuters and drivers have reacted with dismay after authorities in Lagos announced a ban on commercial motorcycles, a move that will affect thousands of commuters and threaten ride-hailing startups. Naneka Chili reports.
Commuters and taxi drivers in Nigeria's notoriously congested business capital, Lagos, have reacted with dismay after authorities announced a ban on commercial motorcycles and three-wheelers across nearly the entire city. Lagos state government said it will ban the taxi bikes known as Okadas and three-wheelers known as Kekes from February 1 because of what it described as the chaos and disorderliness and scary figures on fatal accidents. But for Lagosian commuters like Folari Busun, Okadas and Kekes are essentially for zipping through the thick congestion that bogs down larger vehicles.
It's an easy way to beat traffic. So if they ban them, I don't know what the plan of government is, because whatever the plan is, it's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be good as the bikes and the keke.
And for drivers like Johnson Ikubi, his Marara or tuk-tuk taxi is his livelihood. He says those who are banning the vehicles do not care because they never use them.
It's not easy to get a job. Imagine that I park my camera, where will I get a job? I mean, I'm going to spend a little money I have.
There are an estimated 8 million Okada drivers across the whole of Nigeria, many of them employed by commercial motorcycle companies like Max.ng and GoKada. They've been trying to capitalize on Lagos' congested roads by expanding their operations, but Max.ng and GoKada raised around $5 million in investment last year. But such companies are included in the ban a Lagos state official had said with only courier services exempted. GoKada founder Fahim Saleh said the decision was disappointing, but he was not sure how it was going to be enforced. Chinedu Azodo, co-founder of Max.ng, said he has not heard directly from the government, but said the ban amounted to a restriction on poor people.
Well, you may have heard of lab-grown chicken and beef, but now there's a new form of faux meat on the menu. A Singapore-based startup is aiming to become the first company in the world to bring shrimp grown in a laboratory to diners' plates. Megan Revel reports.
You may have heard about the dozens of companies testing lab-grown chicken and beef, hoping to break into the alternative meat market, which Barclays estimates could be worth $140 billion by 2029. But a Singapore-based startup is wading into crustaceans, catering for more diverse diets.
And most of the companies that have started in the last 3 to 4 years have concentrated on red and white meat because that is what is consumed much more in the West.
Shiok Meat says it's the first company to grow shrimp and lobster in the lab. It extracts cell samples, feeds them nutrients, and then nurtures the stem cells into meat over 4 to 6 weeks.
So all of the magic basically happens here.
The proof of the so-called clean meat is in the taste. One of our reporters tried it out themselves.
It just tastes like a regular dumpling.
But it doesn't come cheap.
And this dumpling by itself cost about $200 to $300 to make.
2.2 pounds of shrimp meat currently costs $5,000.
90% of our cost from that is actually this nutrient solution that you see everywhere.
The company hopes that cost will be lowered by 100 times this year. Its eco-credentials may be appetising too. Land-based farming has long been known for its environmental impact, one of the selling points for alternative beef or poultry. Aquaculture is no different. It's been blamed for hits to mangroves and other ecosystems across Asia, and some farms have been criticised for overuse of antibiotics.
OK, before we go, let's get to some of your feedback. I don't know if I'd be that keen on a $300 shrimp growing in a petri dish. Anyway, on school fees, someone has said $16,500 is one of the cheaper halls. This is the conversation about going back to school and university. $16,500 is the cost of one of the halls at Vic, we're being told. Others at Vic, this person says, are around $20,000. It's 3 incredibly unhealthy, appalling meals per day. They say carb-based food from kitchen staff who can't cook and don't care. Mark says, regarding costs of sending kids to school, Mark says he has 11 children and finds it very hard to afford the cost of sending them to school, and he's looking for some pointers on making some savings there. Also, the story on housing in Wairarapa, no state houses there. This person's saying that we need to lower the price of building houses by taking GST off building supplies, and someone else is saying, why can't the government please explain why kit-set houses are not being built? People are desperate and kit-set homes seem to be an obvious solution. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. See you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The mother of a 4-year-old Auckland boy who suffered extensive facial injuries when he fell from his wheelchair says he's still traumatised. An Auckland woman stuck in the deadly coronavirus zone in China says more information is needed for the government's proposed evacuation plan. Mayors in the Northland region hope today's rail investment announcement is a sign Auckland's freight will move to Northport. The Advertising Standards Authority has ruled a National Party advertisement is mischievous but not misleading. And charities in Masterton are under pressure because of a lack of social housing, no state houses in the area, and the one community housing provider with a lengthy wait list. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
About 6 flights a day are arriving. It's not clear how full those flights are, but we know more than 2,000 people have arrived from China since Monday.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late